the uninvited guest. Sarah couldn't wait for her weekend getaway. After months of working late nights and dealing with deadlines, she finally had some time to herself. She'd been daydreaming about this trip for weeks, imagining the peace and quiet, the smell of fresh mountain air, and cozying up by a warm fireplace. The cabin she'd rented on Airbnb looked perfect in the photos. It was a small wooden house tucked away in the mountains, surrounded by tall trees and wide open views. The listing promised total seclusion, which was exactly what Sarah wanted. She packed her car early Friday morning, bringing along her German Shepherd, Max, for company. The drive to the mountains was peaceful. As she left the city behind, the roads became narrower, winding through thick forests and up steep hills. Sarah turned on her favorite playlist and rolled down the windows. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head sticking out the window, enjoying the breeze. When they arrived at the cabin, Sarah was delighted. It was even more charming than she'd imagined. The wooden deck wrapped around the house, offering stunning views of the valley below. A small creek ran nearby, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds. "This is perfect," Sarah said to Max as she unloaded her bags. Max wagged his tail, sniffing the ground excitedly. Inside, the cabin was cozy and inviting. The furniture was rustic but comfortable, with a big couch in front of the fireplace. The kitchen was small but well equipped, and the bedroom had a large window that looked out over the forest. Sarah smiled, feeling her stress melt away. After settling in, she took Max for a walk around the property. They explored a nearby trail where Sarah snapped pictures of the scenery. The air was cool and crisp, and the sun peeked through the trees, casting golden light on the ground. Sarah went to the front door. By the time they returned to the cabin, it was evening. Sarah made herself a cup of tea and sat on the deck, watching the sunset. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt truly at peace. As night fell, she lit a fire in the fireplace and curled up on the couch with a book. Max lay at her feet, dozing off. Everything felt perfect, until she heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps on the deck outside. At first, Sarah thought she was imagining things. She paused, listening carefully, but the sound didn't come again. Shrugging it off as her imagination, or maybe an animal wandering by, she went back to reading. But a few minutes later, the sound came again, this time louder and more distinct. It was definitely footsteps. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She set down her book and looked at Max, who had also perked up, his ears twitching. Probably just a deer, she told herself, trying to stay calm. She grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the front door. The deck creaked slightly as she stepped outside, shining the light around. The forest loomed dark and silent around her. The only movement was the gentle sway of tree branches in the wind. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaky. No response. After a few moments, Sarah decided it was nothing and went back inside. She locked the door behind her, double-checking to make sure all the windows were secured. Later that night, as she got ready for bed, Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. She kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see someone peering in, but the forest outside was pitch black, and nothing seemed out of place. The next morning, by the time she climbed into bed, Max had already claimed his spot at the foot of the bed. He seemed calm, which reassured Sarah a little. Still, she locked her bedroom door before turning out the lights. It was around midnight when Max started growling. The low, rumbling sound woke Sarah instantly. Her heart raced as she sat up, trying to figure out what had upset him. Max was staring at the bedroom door, his ears pinned back and his fur bristling. "Max, what's wrong?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She held her breath, listening. At first, all she heard was the crackling of the fire in the living room. But then there it was again, the sound of footsteps. Only this time they were heavier, slower, and closer. Someone was on the deck. Sarah's hand shook as she reached for her phone. She tiptoed to the bedroom window and carefully peeked through the curtain. What she saw made her blood run cold. A man was standing in the shadows just beyond the porch light. He was tall and wearing a dark hoodie. In his hand, he held what looked like a crowbar. Sarah froze, her mind racing. Who was he? What did he want? Max growled louder, his body tense as he stared at the door. Sarah backed away from the window, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She dialed 911 with shaky fingers, whispering to the operator about the man outside. "The cabin is in the mountains," she explained, her voice barely steady. "It's remote, so it might take a while to get here." The operator assured her that help was on the way. The next 30 minutes felt like hours. Sarah stayed in the bedroom with Max, clutching a heavy flashlight as her only weapon. She could hear the man moving outside, his footsteps circling the cabin. At one point, she heard a loud thud near the back door, as if he was trying to force it open. Finally, the sound of sirens broke through the night. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter as the police arrived. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. When the officers searched the property, they found clear signs that someone had tried to break in. The back door had scratches and dents where the man had tried to pry it open. But the most chilling discovery was under the cabin. There was a small crawl space hidden beneath the house, accessible through a trapdoor in the deck. Inside, the officers found an old sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and other items that suggested someone had been living there recently. Temperatures ranging from cool in summer to hot in winter, to cold in winter and cold in summer, to warm in winter, which was suggestive of the item. Sarah couldn't believe it. The thought of someone secretly living under the cabin while she was inside made her skin crawl. But then she read scary stories all the time anyway. About 5 months before Sarah left for work, the police stayed with her while she packed her things. Sarah didn't want to spend another minute in that cabin. By the time she and Max left, the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. Later, the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains, and all too soon, Sarah was asleep. She never returned to the cabin or any Airbnb in the mountains. Most days, the haunted house. Tom and Lisa had been looking forward to their vacation for months. They both had busy lives and wanted a break from their routines. After some searching, they decided to book a historic house in New Orleans for their romantic getaway. The house was listed on Airbnb, and the photos showed a beautiful old home with antique furniture, elegant decorations, and a cozy atmosphere. The host mentioned that the house had a rich history, which only made it more appealing. The couple arrived on a sunny afternoon. The house looked just like the pictures, a large, elegant building with tall windows, iron balconies, and a beautiful garden. It felt like stepping back in time. They couldn't wait to unpack and start enjoying their stay. But as soon as they walked in, they noticed something strange. The air inside the house felt cold, even though it was warm outside. Tom thought it might be the air conditioning, but Lisa felt uneasy. She brushed it off, telling herself it was just her imagination. The first evening went smoothly. They explored the house, admired the antique furniture, and cooked dinner in the vintage-style kitchen. As they ate, they talked about their plans for the trip, visiting the French Quarter, trying local food, and maybe taking a ghost tour, since New Orleans was famous for its haunted history. They laughed about the idea of ghosts and didn't think much of it. But that night, strange things began to happen. As they were getting ready for bed, the lights in the bathroom started flickering. Tom checked the switch and said it was probably a minor electrical issue. Lisa wasn't so sure. The flickering stopped after a few minutes, so they went to bed and forgot about it. In the middle of the night, Lisa woke up to a soft creaking sound. She thought it was just the old wooden floors settling, but then she heard what sounded like whispers. She froze, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the hallway. Lisa held her breath and listened, but the whispers stopped. She told herself it must have been the wind or her imagination, and went back to sleep. The next morning, Lisa told Tom about the whispers. He teased her, saying she was letting the idea of ghosts get to her. They laughed it off and went out to explore the city. They had a wonderful day visiting the French Quarter, trying beignets and listening to live jazz music. By the time they got back to the house that evening, they were tired but happy. However, the strange events continued. As they were relaxing in the living room, they heard a loud creak. One of the doors down the hallway had opened on its own. Lisa jumped, but Tom said it was probably just the wind. He got up to close the door, but when he tried, it felt stuck, as if someone was holding it open. He eventually managed to shut it, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night was even more unsettling. Around 3 a.m., Lisa woke up again. This time she felt like someone was watching her. She opened her eyes and saw a shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. Her heart raced and she screamed. Tom woke up instantly and turned on the bedside lamp, but the figure was gone. Lisa was shaking and insisted she had seen someone. Tom tried to calm her down, saying it was probably a dream or a trick of the light. The next morning, they decided to do some research on the house. They found out that it had a dark past. In the 1800s, it had been the site of a tragic murder. A young woman who lived there had been killed by an intruder, and her death had never been solved. Over the years, people had reported seeing her ghost in the house. Some said she appeared as a shadowy figure, while others heard whispers or felt an unexplainable coldness in the air. The stories were a lie. That library was the place where the ghost of her murdered whispered and called for her heart. Lisa was terrified. She wanted to leave immediately, but Tom wasn't convinced. He thought the stories were just local legends, meant to scare people. Still, to ease Lisa's mind, he contacted the host to ask if they had ever experienced anything strange in the house. The host hesitated before admitting that other guests had reported similar incidents. However, they insisted that the ghost was harmless and just part of the house's charm. Lisa didn't feel reassured. She couldn't shake the memory of the shadowy figure and the whispers. She told Tom she didn't want to stay another night. Tom finally agreed, saying it wasn't worth upsetting her. They packed their bags and left the house that afternoon, cutting their trip short. End of section 34. This is the recording office for progress files. Now back to the class. Please don't sit in the class. They checked into a hotel for the rest of their stay in New Orleans. Although the hotel was nice, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the house. She wondered if the ghost was real or if her mind had been playing tricks on her. Tom, on the other hand, tried to make the best of the situation and encouraged Lisa to enjoy the rest of their trip. Even after they returned home, the experience stayed with them. Lisa avoided talking about it, while Tom told the story to their friends, often adding a humorous twist to make it less scary. But deep down, Lisa couldn't forget the feeling of being watched or the cold air in the house. She sometimes wondered if the ghost was still there, waiting for the next visitors to arrive. The haunted house became a memory they would never forget. It taught them to be cautious about old homes with rich histories, and made Lisa a firm believer in ghosts. As for Tom, he remained skeptical, but admitted that the experience was one of the most unusual and memorable moments of their lives. The Pushy Host, a travel story. Jake had always dreamed of taking a solo trip to the city. It was something he had planned for months, saving every penny he could and researching every detail of his itinerary. He wanted to explore the iconic landmarks, savor the local cuisine, and experience the hustle and bustle of city life. Most importantly, he was excited about having some time to himself to reflect and recharge. After all, his busy life back home left little room for solitude. When it came to accommodations, Jake decided to book a room in a shared apartment through Airbnb. It was more affordable than a hotel, and the host listing promised a quiet, private space, just what Jake needed. The host, a man named Steve, had glowing reviews from other guests who praised his hospitality. One review even described him as attentive without being overbearing. That sounded perfect to Jake. When I came back into the stem, he clicked the Book Now button without hesitation. As his trip approached, Jake grew more and more excited. He packed his bags carefully, making sure not to forget his camera, travel journal, and favorite pair of walking shoes. He even planned out his first few days in the city, mapping out the sights he wanted to see and the cafes he wanted to visit. Everything seemed to be falling into place, until it wasn't anymore. Like everything else, it was necessary for a balance in life. Whoever was in charge of Obliterator also needed to relocate. When Jake finally arrived at the city, he was in awe. The towering skyscrapers, the lively streets, and the diverse crowd of people filled him with energy. After navigating the public transport system, he made his way to Steve's apartment. The building was a little older than Jake had imagined, but it had a certain charm with its ivy-covered walls and vintage-style windows. Steve greeted him at the door with a wide smile. "Welcome, Jake. Come on in," Steve said, extending his hand. His handshake was firm, almost too firm, but Jake shrugged it off. He figured Steve was just enthusiastic. And then he noticed Steve's face. It was bright red from the sun and clean-shaven. Steve insisted on giving Jake a tour of the entire building. At first, Jake thought it was a kind gesture. Steve showed him the common areas, like the kitchen and living room, and pointed out where the laundry machines were. But then Steve's tour became oddly detailed. He led Jake to the basement, where he showed him the utility room, and then to the rooftop, even though guests weren't allowed up there. "I just want you to feel at home," Steve said with a grin that lingered a little too long. Jake nodded politely, though he was starting to feel a bit uneasy. All he wanted was to settle into his room and relax after a long day of travel. When they finally reached Jake's room, Steve opened the door with a flourish, as if unveiling a masterpiece. The room was small but cozy, with a neatly made bed, a small desk, and a window that overlooked the busy street below. Jake's initial discomfort began to fade as he imagined himself writing in his journal by the window, or falling asleep to the sounds of the city. Finally, when the daily routine was done with for the rest of the summer, Jake was ready to move in. "If you need anything, just let me know," Steve said. "I'll be around." "Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it," Jake replied, eager to have some time to himself. But Steve didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered in the doorway, asking Jake about his plans for the trip. Jake answered politely, hoping Steve would take the hint and give him some space. Eventually, Steve left, and Jake let out a sigh of relief. What do you want?" The first day went smoothly. Jake spent hours exploring the city, visiting a famous art museum, and trying a delicious street food dish he had read about online. By the time he returned to the apartment, he was exhausted but happy. However, his mood quickly shifted when he opened the door to his room and found Steve sitting on the bed. "Oh hey, you're back," Steve said casually, as if it were perfectly normal for him to be there. He had Jake's laptop open on his lap. Jake's stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Ellie was in her mid-30s and she was already becoming unhealthy. She was already visibly paler than usual on a daily basis. Steve looked up, unfazed. "I noticed you left your laptop on, and it was making some noise. I thought I'd fix it for you." Jake's mind raced. He hadn't left his laptop on, and even if he had, it wasn't Steve's place to touch it, let alone use it. "I'd prefer if you didn't touch my things," Jake said firmly, stepping into the room and setting his bag down. The hallway was full of laughter, as different nostrils caught the smell of weed. Steve shrugged and stood up, handing the laptop back to Jake. "Just trying to help," he said with a sheepish smile. Jake didn't respond. He waited for Steve to leave before locking the door behind him. That night, Jake barely slept. He couldn't shake the feeling that his privacy had been invaded. The next morning, he decided to confront Steve and set some boundaries. Over breakfast, Jake politely but firmly told Steve that he valued his privacy and would appreciate it if Steve didn't enter his room without permission. Of course," Steve said, nodding. "I completely understand." But Steve's behavior didn't change. Throughout the day, he kept popping up unexpectedly. Once, he knocked on Jake's door just to ask if Jake wanted a cup of tea. Another time, he barged in without knocking, claiming he needed to check the radiator. Jake's frustration grew with each passing interaction. The final straw came on Jake's third evening in the city. He returned from a long day of sightseeing, looking forward to some quiet time in his room. When he opened the door, he found Steve sitting on the bed again, this time scrolling through his phone. Jake's patience snapped. "See, this is unacceptable," Jake said, his voice shaking with anger. "I've asked you to respect my privacy, and you keep ignoring me." Steve looked startled, then defensive. was just checking to make sure everything was okay," he said. "You're overreacting. My house is far from crackling away in the sunlight." He shrugged it off. "No, I'm not," Jake shot back. "This is my space and you have no right to be here without my permission." Feeling violated and unsafe, Jake packed his belongings that night and left the apartment. He found a last-minute hotel room and reported Steve to Airbnb, detailing everything that had happened. The company apologized and assured Jake they would look into the matter. Once the investigation was completed, he returned to Malibu and returned to room 24. The experience left a lasting impression on Jake. While he continued to enjoy the rest of his trip, he couldn't shake the unease he felt. The incident made him wary of booking shared accommodations in the future. He learned an important lesson about setting boundaries and trusting his instincts, which are always woven into them from the Colonel's grandfather onwards. He found this reflected in his instincts. Back home, Jake shared his story with friends and family. Some were shocked, while others had similar tales of uncomfortable stays. Jake realized that while travel often brings adventure and excitement, it also comes with its challenges. Despite everything, he was determined not to let one bad experience ruin his love for exploring new places. He would simply be more cautious next time, ensuring that his adventures remained as enjoyable as he had always imagined. The fake listing, a vacation nightmare. Emma had always been the planner of her friend group. Whenever her friends wanted to do something fun, Emma would take the lead, looking up options, comparing prices, and organizing everything. This time, Emma and her three closest friends, Lila, Jacob, and Mia, decided they needed a break from their busy lives. They all agreed a beach vacation sounded perfect. Warm sand, cool waves, and days of relaxation were exactly what they needed. Emma spent hours online searching for the ideal place to stay. She scrolled through countless Airbnb listings, looking for something beautiful yet affordable. After a lot of searching, she found it, a gorgeous villa that seemed like it came straight out of a travel magazine. The listing showed photos of a bright, spacious villa with large windows letting in lots of sunlight. It had modern furniture, a private pool surrounded by palm trees, and a stunning patio where they could have meals while listening to the ocean. The description said it was only steps away from the beach, making it sound even more perfect. To top it all off, the price was surprisingly low, almost too good to be true. "I found the perfect place," Emma announced in their group chat, sending the link to her friends. "That's Steve's garden." Lila was the first to respond. "Wow, this looks amazing, and it's so cheap. Let's book it." Jacob agreed. "Looks great. Let's do it before someone else nags it." Even cautious Mia, who usually double-checked everything, was convinced. "The reviews are all positive and the pictures look incredible. I say we go for it." Feeling confident, Emma booked the villa for their week-long trip. They couldn't stop talking about it as they packed. Lila imagined herself lounging by the pool. Jacob couldn't wait to grill food on the patio, and Mia was excited to collect seashells on the beach. Emma felt proud of herself for finding such a great deal. When the day of their trip finally arrived, they were buzzing with excitement. They loaded up the car with their bags, snacks, and a playlist full of summer tunes. The drive to the villa took several hours, but the thought of relaxing in their dream getaway kept them energized. However, as they got closer to their destination, things started to feel off. The GPS took them down a narrow, bumpy road surrounded by overgrown bushes. There were no signs of the beach, just empty fields and run-down houses. "Are we sure this is the right way?" Mia asked, frowning at the map on her phone. Emma double-checked the address. "This is what the listing says. Maybe the villa is tucked away somewhere private." My phone rings at the foot of the stairs. When they finally arrived, their jaws dropped, but not in a good way. The villa looked nothing like the photos. Instead of a luxurious modern house, they saw a shabby rundown building with peeling paint and cracked windows. The private pool was a tiny dirty rectangle filled with green water and floating leaves. The patio furniture was rusty and broken, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. "This can't be right," Jacob said, shaking his head. Emma felt her stomach sink. She opened the listing on her phone and compared the photos to what was in front of them. It was the same address, but the house looked completely different. Maybe it's just bad on the outside, Lila said, trying to stay optimistic. Let's check the inside. They walked in and were hit with a horrible smell, a mix of mildew and something rotten. The furniture inside was old and stained, the walls were dirty, and the beds looked like they hadn't been cleaned in ages. There were cobwebs in the corners, and the kitchen was full of ants. "This is a nightmare," Mia whispered, covering her nose. Captain Mia. Emma felt a wave of guilt. She had been so excited about the trip and trusted the listing without doing more research. "I'm so sorry, you guys. I didn't know it would be like this." They worked hard to keep the listing honest. They wanted the value of their product to be priceless, and the staff needed to be paid well. "It's not your fault," Jacob said. "These people tricked us." The group tried to figure out what to do next. Emma messaged the host immediately, explaining the situation and asking for a refund. The host replied quickly but was anything but helpful, and they both left. A while later, the housekeeper came to the door with a large blue bag in hand which was filled with cans. Under the bag were scattered small pieces of glass, all damaged. "You're exaggerating," the host wrote. "The villa is exactly as described. No refunds." The receptionist was confused and tried to reason with the man angrily. Why would he want to leave his villa? But when he agreed to remove the paper objects, Emma couldn't believe it. She sent photos of the filthy pool, broken furniture, and other problems, but the host stopped responding. Emma was mortified by her actions. She hated herself for doing the wrong things, and she hated her wrong thinking because she looked for possibility in the wrong places. The cool thing about Emma, with no help from the host, Emma contacted Airbnb's customer service. She explained everything and sent the photos as proof. The customer service team promised to investigate, but it would take time. Meanwhile, the group was stuck in this awful villa, unsure of what to do. Plus, they had nightmares about it on top of that, so there was just a little more to worry about. Putting on her costume of heiress. They spent the first night in the villa because they had nowhere else to go. None of them could sleep well. The beds were uncomfortable and the smell made it hard to breathe. Lila even found a cockroach in the bathroom, which made her scream and vow never to step foot in there again. The next morning, they decided they couldn't stay there another night. They packed their bags and started looking for alternative accommodations. Most places nearby were already booked or far too expensive. After hours of searching, they finally found a small motel with just enough space for the four of them. During that time away, they wrote out screenplays and ideas for films. They decided that it was time to marshal their forces. It wasn't the luxury villa they had dreamed of, but at least it was clean and safe. As they settled into the motel, they tried to make the best of their trip. They spent their days exploring the beach, eating at local restaurants, and laughing about their misadventure. A few days later, Airbnb finally got back to Emma. After reviewing the evidence, they agreed to refund the group's money. While it was a relief, the refund didn't make up for the stress and disappointment they had experienced. As their trip came to an end, Emma and her friends reflected on what happened. "At least we'll have a good story to tell," Jacob joked. Emma nodded, "And I've definitely learned my lesson. From now on, I'm double-checking everything before booking anything." Despite the rocky start, they managed to create some good memories during their trip, but they all agreed that next time, they'd be much more careful and maybe stick to places with better guarantees. Hidden cameras, a lesson in safety. Number 1. Mike and Jenna were a young couple who loved exploring new places and trying new experiences. They lived in a small town but often took trips to different cities whenever they had the time. For their latest getaway, they decided to book a sleek, modern apartment in the heart of a big city. They found it on Airbnb, where the pictures showed a stylish, high-tech space with all the comforts they could ask for. The description promised luxury, convenience, and an unforgettable stay. Excited, they packed their bags and set off. As they rounded the corner on their way back to their car, they noticed a familiar shopper standing in the window of the grocery store. It was Benefits, striving for better. When they arrived at the apartment, it looked just as good as the pictures. The walls were painted a calming shade of gray, and the furniture was minimalistic but comfortable. There was a large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, a well-equipped kitchen with shiny appliances, and a cozy bedroom with fluffy pillows. The view from the window showed the bustling city below, and Mike and Jenna couldn't wait to start their vacation. The first evening, they settled in. Mike cooked pasta in the fancy kitchen, while Jenna set the table. They laughed and talked about their plans to visit local attractions, try some famous restaurants, and maybe do a little shopping. Everything felt perfect. After dinner, they watched a movie on the big TV and then decided to call it a night. They went to bed, feeling happy and excited for the days ahead. One of the things they did to explore the city was when they went to find the kitchen, small as neighborhood goes. All the buildings were native bricks and mortar. They had lavas, and they made pasta. Everything felt perfect. After dinner, they went to find a restaurant to try some famous food, and they decided to call it a night. They went to bed, feeling happy and excited for the days ahead. The next morning, Mike woke up early. He loved exploring new places and wanted to check out the apartment's features. As he walked around, his eyes landed on something unusual near the bookshelf in the living room. It was a tiny blinking light. At first, he thought it might be part of some gadget or decoration, but something about it felt off. Curious, Mike took a closer look. What he discovered shocked him. It was a hidden camera, carefully placed to blend in with the bookshelf. Mike's heart sank. Why would there be a camera in the apartment? Feeling uneasy, he called Jenna over to show her what he'd found. Jenna was just as shocked as Mike. They couldn't understand why someone would put a hidden camera in a rental property. Determined to find out if there were more cameras, Mike and Jenna started searching the apartment. They checked every corner, every piece of furniture, and every decoration. Their search uncovered 2 more cameras. One was in the bedroom, hidden near the air conditioner vent. The other was in the bathroom, discreetly placed near the ceiling. Discovering cameras in such private spaces made them feel angry, scared, and deeply violated. Jenna immediately suggested they leave the apartment. Mike agreed. They quickly packed their bags, grabbed their belongings, and left the place without looking back. They decided to check into a nearby hotel instead. Once they were safe and settled in, they sat down to figure out what to do next. The first thing they did was report the incident to Airbnb. They explained everything they'd found and provided pictures of the hidden cameras as proof. The customer service team took their complaints seriously and promised to investigate. Mike and Jenna also contacted the local police to report the cameras. The police came to the apartment to inspect it and collected evidence for their investigation. But when they went to put the cameras in the seller's bathroom door was shut and a photograph taken. As the investigation unfolded, it turned out the host of the Airbnb had installed the cameras. When questioned, the host claimed the cameras were for security purposes and to monitor his property. However, placing cameras in private areas like bedrooms and bathrooms is illegal and a violation of privacy. Airbnb banned the host's account and assured Mike and Jenna that such behavior was not tolerated on their platform. So how does this affect the investigation and protection of the host's privacy? Mike and Jenna that such behavior was not tolerated on their platform. Despite the swift action, the experience left Mike and Jenna shaken. They couldn't stop thinking about how vulnerable they had been. The thought of someone watching them without their knowledge was deeply disturbing. It was a hard lesson, but it taught them the importance of being cautious. From that day on, Mike and Jenna made it a point to thoroughly inspect any place they stayed. They researched ways to spot hidden cameras and even bought a small device that could detect them. They learned to check for unusual objects, small holes, or lights that seemed out of place. Their travels continued, but they were much more careful about their accommodations. Having spent the last few weeks with them, I began to feel a little uneasy, especially with Valerie's absence. But there were so many other benefits, in most places it wasn't noticeable. Their story also became a wake-up call for their friends and family. When Mike and Jenna shared what happened, everyone was shocked. Many of their friends admitted they'd never thought about the possibility of hidden cameras in rental properties. Mike and Jenna's experience sparked conversations about safety and privacy during travels. Over time, Mike and Jenna's fear turned into a mission. They started sharing tips on social media about how to stay safe while traveling. They wrote blog posts, made videos, and even gave talks at local events. Their goal was to raise awareness and help others avoid the same experience. They wanted people to enjoy their trips without worrying about hidden dangers. One of their most popular posts was a guide on how to spot hidden cameras. It included tips like 1. Inspect the room. Look for unusual objects like clocks, smoke detectors, or chargers that might hide cameras. Check for small holes. Cameras are often hidden behind tiny holes in walls or objects. Turn off the lights. Hidden cameras sometimes have small LED lights that are easier to spot in the dark. Film stock's becoming expensive and making it harder and harder to obtain such film quality lighting. Use a camera detector. These devices can help identify hidden cameras by detecting their signals. Cover up. If you are unsure, use tape or a scarf to cover anything suspicious. Their efforts made a difference. People started sharing their own stories and thanking Mike and Jenna for their advice. Some even reached out to say they'd found hidden cameras in their accommodations thanks to the couple's tips. It felt good to know they were helping others. While the incident was terrifying at the time, it also brought out Mike and Jenna's resilience and determination. They refused to let it ruin their love for travel. Instead, they used it as an opportunity to grow and to educate others. Today, they continue to explore the world, but with a sharper eye and a stronger sense of safety. Their story is a reminder to always be vigilant and to stand up for your right to privacy, no matter where you are.